Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing fine. And till now, what we have studied so far, as you know, we studied our classical criticism, which included what? Our uh, Indian classical criticism and European classical criticism. And then after that, we had Renaissance criticism or Elizabethan criticism. And we talked a lot of things about, Philip Sidney and others, right? And if you haven't watched that session, you should go and watch because it's very important and you are definitely gonna see like couple of questions. I mean, more than that also. And in this session, particular this session, you're going to get at least 3 to 4 questions and sometimes five also, because it includes Pope, Dryden, Swift, and Samuel Johnson's. They are very important, and definitely you're gonna see a lot of questions from that. And I hope you all are ready and start to learn right now. I'm looking at the people right now. There are not enough people, but because it's a sudden class, and that's how I'm gonna do it, right? But from tomorrow I'll just share the link before like 1 hour, so you will know actually like when we are going live. But before that, what you're gonna do, you have to like the video, and also if you want to have any suggestion, you can just write in the chat box. I'm there to help you and we will interact together. So these live chat is very important. If you want to interact with me, or if you can't hear me properly, or any mistakes I'm doing, you can write it there, right? So let's move forward. And tonight, what we're gonna talk about is neoclassical criticism. It's very important session because you're gonna see a lot of questions, and also it is a lot of questions, almost around 50 questions. So you can see, and they are all from past 4 to 5 even 6 years, and they are as you can see 40 questions in 6 years. And it's very important session for you because you're definitely gonna see 4 to 5 questions from this session alone. And if you pay more attention to it, you are definitely gonna kind of grab all the whatever they throw at you. It's very important session for you guys, and please stick together, watch till the end, because some of you, what you do, you just watch like couple of minutes and then leave it. It's only gonna help you, and I'm bringing it this session for you for free, especially for free. Remember that. And that's why if you want to notes, you can always text me on WhatsApp or Telegram. I'll kind of give you the notes, and you can purchase other notes as well. But tonight our focus is only on neoclassical criticism, right? And whoever is there online, you can just say hi in the chat box, and then I'll interact with you along the way, while we discuss all these stuff, right? So let's start our session here. Uh, what we're gonna talk about? We're gonna have a little bit in classical. We're gonna talk about Leviathan. We're gonna talk about an essay on criticism, an essay of dramatic poesy by Dryden. Then we'll also talk about the art of poesy by Nicholas Boileau. Then John Locke, an essay on concerning human understanding. Remember, all these we have studied. If you have watched our session on neoclassical period, we have already discussed almost all of them. But again, it's a separate session because of criticism, so we have kind of filtered it and also sort out for you all these you know uh, people here. So anyway, Alexander Pope's, we're gonna cover two of his essays on man and criticism. Moral essay is also important, but from these two, you always get question at least one. And remember, we also have will have discussion on the pleasure and the battle of the books. We already discussed in the previous session, and as you know, in that session we already covered neoclassical period, we covered old English period, we covered middle English period, we covered Chaucer's age, right? And we also covered Jacob Elizabethan, then Jacobean, then Caroline. We also discussed, Augustan period, Restoration period, right? And we are now in neoclassical period, and there also we have discussed. Our recent session was on romantic revival, and tomorrow it's gonna be romantic period, where we'll discuss on Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats, and Byron and others, right? And after that, we'll only left with 5 to 6 more sessions, and that'll be over. Your British literature is gonna be over. Remember, only how many videos are there? 18 to 20 videos, and in that, we have almost covered, we will cover every single stuff on British literature. And remember, you're not gonna get any question, out of what I'm teaching right now, because we have collected the question and the trend is the same, and we are following. Definitely you're gonna have at least 870 to 80% questions from the session that I'm taking, all the sessions, 20 session, which will be like 20 to 30 hours total maximum, and that'll be enough for you for the British literature. And along with that, what we're doing, we'll have somewhere around 20 session for criticism, theory and culture all together. It'll be like we're just moving through the period wise, age wise, and also PYQ. All PYQ will be author wise and period wise, right? So that's very important. So 2020, it seems like 50 hours and you are done with criticism and British literature, and like couple of 10 session maybe for all the Commonwealth literature, including American literature. So we're going to cover that also. And there will be 2 3 more session on language, and Indian writing in English will have like more session on it, maybe 3 or maybe 5 sessions on, because definitely you're gonna see a lot of questions from that. Anyway, enough with the introduction and what we are going to do. We should focus right now at what we are studying right now. As I told you, we'll also talk about a Swift, the Battle of the Books, Burke's philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas, and the Sublime, and David Hume, a treatise of human nature, inquiry concerning human understanding. And we already had a separate session on Samuel Johnson. You can go and watch that session also. We're only gonna focus a little bit about Samuel Johnson because we have 1 hour session on Samuel Johnson, where you're definitely gonna see 4 questions alone, direct. 2 question will be direct, and other will be indirect questions, especially on the criticism part, right? Our focus will be tonight on dictionary, preface to Shakespeare, and we also gonna talk about the eminent English poets, all the lives about them, right? And we'll also talk about Joshua Renault. As you know, he's the founder of the literary club, who founded with Samuel Johnson, right? So very important, and they ask question on that also. We'll also have a quick look on the critique of judgment, and most importantly, all the question asked in neoclassical criticism. I hope the our plan is already shared with you, and now it's time for us to begin. So first of all, what is neoclassical criticism? Neoclassical criticism starts actually from the Charles Restoration period, and actually we have already covered till Renaissance criticism, and which went till Restoration, right? And that we have already covered. And but in the restoration period, we're gonna cover also Dryden here itself, right? So we are just making now making all these authors in one group where we are all discussing right now. Okay, so neoclassical criticism, as I told you, remember, starting from here, and it goes till over 1700 plus, somewhere around 50. And then we'll have romantic criticism, and there we'll talk about Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, and Byron, right? So anyway, as you know, their ideal was what? Horace, Ars Poetica. So every criticism was based on Ars Poetica also, and it was that kind of dialogue was humanity's sake, not art's sake. Art's sake just start in Victorian criticism, right? Victorian time. So that you have to understand. So anyway, as you know, Pope said about the neoclassical or Augustan period as what's of was thought. It was about true wit, right? So that is all introduction, and let's move to Thomas Hobbes. We already talked about Thomas Hobbes, everything about his life. What you have to remember that he wrote answer to Sir William Davenant in preface to Gondy Bird. They have asked this question previously, not in 7 years, but far previously. Anyway, Leviathan. As I told you, Leviathan, you should know the date because this is definitely gonna show up in chronological order. And what else you can just know about this Leviathan? Remember these keyword we already talked: social contract and absolute monarchy, and your Leviathan is done. Very important. And what he said, that sovereign has 12 principal rights. Okay, now moving up to John Dryden. We have already discussed about his life, and what we're gonna talk about here is we have actually a separate session on Dryden as well, where we discussed all the progress of not all the essay on poesy. We have already talked about it like in detail, but here I'm also gonna go through again so you will remember all about his life. You can find it there, but most importantly you should know that he has not written poems and plays, but also prose and also the criticism, very important one, right? And as you know, one of the important thing that you should know about him, that he was the earliest his earliest important work praised Cromwell. And you know the formula, right? We have already discussed first work, second work, last work, second last, and in the middle we have the code, so that you can go and watch. Remember, I'm not gonna do it. I'm only focusing on here what on there on his criticism part and all the other critic at that time. So let's talk about an essay of dramatic poesy. As you know, we can cover every single stuff by what in single code, like huge sack of modern plots. What does it mean here? Huge means Eugenius, Sack means Sackville, and he supported what modern drama, so modern and mostly about the plots. That's all, and your Eugenius. Second, we have a coda critis, cry how classical drama performed. So cry represent critics, crites, cry represent crites, and how Howard classical drama, he supported classical drama, and how it was performed. So all these things, right, through the code. Second is Lissy is sad after watching French drama. So Lissy represent Lycidius, and of course sad is sadly, and it French, supported praises what French drama, and especially what all the unities, Aristotle's unity, especially tragedy part, right? And then we have Neander is very simple. Neander represent is the new star of Elizabeth. Neander, the whole word is like new, Dryden, and the new star of Elizabethan drama. So he supported Elizabethan drama, and it includes Shakespeare and others also. So very important stuff. And as you know, what happens in British people at that time when it was happening, that Dutch English war, and what happened suddenly, the patriotism kind of emerged in English period. So uh, here Dryden supported drama because of that pride he felt about their culture and especially their literature. So that's about Neander. So as I always tell you, it starts from Dutch English war. There is a river in a boat, three people, like four people, right, watching the war happening here, all the clash, and they're watching talking about all the literature here. So that's the whole starting point, and there you get always question, right? So that you should know. So the four friends debate on the series, as I told you, everything about here in the code is there, so you will understand. And what else we're gonna talk about here? If you remember the code, you can easily get what they represent and what they are supported by. Remember, they invoked in this work particularly Aristotle's poetic, especially about these unities. They talked about all about the structure and play. And remember, what makes a play? A just and lively imitation. So as Aristotle said about the mimesis, the play's mimesis, right? And a lot of things he said. And we have a lot of code about Aristotle's poetics that you can go back and watch. There you'll find there, right? And it focuses on human nature in action. Very important. Two things they ask always in question, that Dryden compares Shakespeare to Homer, Ben Jonson to Virgil, and that's all there. And other is important stuff is the opening line. Remember, it was that memorable day in the first summer of the late war, when our navy engaged to Dutch, and about all about these French fleet and Dutch fleet, right? So that you have to you can read it, you can take a screenshot and read it. But remember that opening scene is very important in uh, you know Okay, so he also talked about Shakespeare, and what he said, he was the man who all modern, perhaps ancient poets had the largest, most comprehensive. So, very important line. They ask a question on that always. And what else they ask is that uh, I should enjoy compare him to the greatest of mankind. This line is very important that you should know. And also, he ever had fit subject of his wit, and did not then raise himself as high above the rest of the poets. So that's all you have to remember in uh, an essay on dramatic poesy. Very important. If this code you remember, then your whole dramatic poesy is done. And let's move on to the question here. As you know, John Dryden wrote dramatic poesy. Samuel Daniel wrote a defense of rhyme. Horace wrote Ars Poetica, and Ben Jonson Timber. Timber, I always say it's like like preface to the lyrical ballad. It's the same kind of stuff. And there he talked about common language. He talked about language. He talked about linguistic and all these stuff. Very important. Timber or discoveries about Ben Jonson, because they have started asking question on Ben Jonson, especially this work, right? So very important. And next, as I told you, all the descriptions are there that you can of course get the note and access it. Right now, next question is talking about two great masters French language that T.S. Eliot contrast with Dryden and Milton. About French, remember he talked about Racine and Charles Baudelaire. Very important that you should know. Again, another question on Dryden was, of course, the chronological order, as you can see here. Uh, anyway, Macfleck no early, then Hindan the Pather, because later he was converted. Right, as you can see, Macfleckno first, then the Hindan the Pather. We have the code, as I told you, first word, last word, and in the middle we have the code. This formula you should follow for every single stuff. Anyway, we have already talked about this. You can go and watch on restoration period, and you'll get everything there. Anyway, let's move forward. And again, the question is mostly about chronological order, so that's the trend in your exam. So remember again, an essay on criticism, lives of the poet, and the preface to lyrica. Easy to answer. This will be the first, then the second will be the lives of the poet in new classical, then it will be preface to cultural preface to lyrical ballads, and 1800, as you know, right? And this will be 79 to 81. Remember, 71. And our dramatic poesy, as you know the date, and culture and anarchy, Victorian, and at the end this. So easy to form if you know the the period easily, right? So the character who discuss about the merits of French drama and English drama in. So, as I told you, who supported the French? Lissy is sad after watching French drama. Remember this code, then it's easy. Sadly, sadly, right? Lycidas after watching French drama, right? So he's French, and what else about? He was sad and what after watching drama. So he also kind of unities of all the plays he was talking about in French drama. Easy to answer. Neander was what? Neander is a new star of Elizabethan uh, drama, right? Easy to answer through the code. And Eugenius was what? Huge sack of plots, right? And Caritas is about the classical drama. So easy to answer. Everything is there in the code itself. You can just take a screenshot. I have already. You can just go back and watch it one more time and take the screenshot. Okay. Let's move on forward. And Nicholas Boileau, very important only because of that, because he did the translation on the subline by Boileau, and that's very important because they didn't ask any question on Boileau till now, but remember that he has translated a work on the subline, very important. And then he also, the art of verse, same thing, is an imitation of ars poetica, and he also talked about the rules for poetry composition, very important. And Pope's essay on criticism imitates Boileau's influence. So, before, when we were talking about Elizabethan, right, you only know what in Elizabethan is an apology for poetry and a school of abuse, right? But abuse, right? But they have started asking about others also, like defense of rhyme, they have started asking, right? And the art of poesy, they have started asking. All these stuff they have already started asking, and remember that we have already discussed all these things and through the code as well. Anyway, I'll tell you about it more. So John Locke, as you know, very important English philosopher. We already talked in romantic revival in our previous session. It was like 2 to 3 days ago. Anyway, so John Locke, you should know, the father of liberalism. Okay, and he influenced what? His writing influenced Voltaire, Rousseau, Hume, and Kant. That anyway we're gonna talk about later in the session. And remember, he, what else he talked about? Theory of mind. And what else he talked about? A blank slate, tabula rasa at birth, filled with experience, right? So that's all there in the work. And he also wrote about two treatises, very important, that he has written. The second treatise on government, that is anyway another work, but all you have to know these two treatises, right? Two tracts and treatise, our code, right? Two T tract, and we have two treatise. Two just go and watch the session, you'll understand. Anyway, two tracts are government, two treatise on government, right? So these are very important. He also talked about concerning education and human nature as well, right? So let's talk about human understanding. So remember, human understanding and human nature is also there, and written by who? Just write in the chat box quickly, and then I'll tell you anyway. So remember, it has how many books? Book 1 talks about the concept of innate ideas. Remember, concerning human understanding is what? Tabula rasa, and filled with later through experience. That's all you have to remember there. And book 1 attempt to refute what? Notion of innate ideas, and Locke's theory of idea, another idea, remember, in book 2. Remember, red sweet round, we already talked, but these you have to know anyway. Okay, so book 3 focuses on the language analysis, very important, and book 3 is concerned with the language. Book 4 about the knowledge, intuition, mathematics, moral philosophy, and natural philosophy as well. But what you have to remember, book 1 blank slate, right? Tabula rasa, and filled with experience. So that's all you have to remember there. Anyway, next we're going to talk about John Dennis, and John Dennis is important only because of that thing, is the advancement of reformation, modern poetry, and what? Reflection, critical, satirical upon Rhapsody. But you have to only know this. And he became acquainted with Dryden as well as Congreve. Okay, Alexander Pope, we have a thorough session before. You can go watch the other part, but here what we are going to talk about the criticism part. As you know, we're going to take essay on criticism. All we're going to talk about here. But anyway, let me tell you here. Pope was born in London, as you know. All these things we already talked about. What else you want to know? That his translation of Homer through wealth, and there was question other than Pope who kind of translated, Homer. So it was or Greek. So what was it? It was Chapman. That was the recent question they have asked in your exam. So in that case, this particular stuff is very important for you to remember. Anyway, let's move on. All this career and work through the code we have already made. You can go and watch. Anyway, essay on man, very important, and there are a lot of stuff that you can remember there. The proper study of mankind is man. Man never is, but always be blessed. All these quotes, because they ask only quotes from that, and it actually was written on the suggestion of Bolingbroke. Very important. And the opening line is "Awake, Saint John," and it is kind of variation from the Milton's claim. Like Milton said, no, that justifies the ways of God to man. And here Pope what said, vindicate the ways of God to man. Very important that you should know. And whatever is a very important. And again he wrote a moral epistle or moral essay as well, and there he said Voltaire called it the most beautiful, useful, sublime didactic poem ever written in any language. So as you can see, it's the importance of this particular work. And what other thing he said, pride is as original sin, and other thing is he said that the author suggests learning poets background to avoid prejudice, right? And next we're going to move the an essay on criticism. They always ask question based on what, especially on the quote. And remember, to err is human, to forgive is design. A little learning is a dangerous and fool rushes where angel fear to tread. Can you write who is the author right now in the chat box quickly if you're there? Anyway, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Parian spring. So that Parian spring they have asked question in your exam, and remember it was from an essay on criticism. So that kind of question you get in your exam. Anyway, what else? Fool rushes in where angel fear to tread, and it was where in the part 3. And he also forbears, Horace ars poetica and Lucretius de Rome natura. Very important, right? And he discusses what the laws which a critic should adhere while analyzing poetry. And what else he said about it, true ease in writing comes from art, not chance. Very important, as those move easily who have learned to dance. And they have asked question on that as well. What else you can remember here is that he got attacked by John Dennis. John Dennis, the same guy we just previously talked about. And Dennis also reappears in Dunciad, right? Thomas Rhymer and Jonathan Swift were among other critics as well. And Rhymer, who had the stronger critique, said what till of late years of England was as free from the critic, as it is from wolves. And they who are least acquainted with the game are aptest to to bark at everything that comes in their way. And that statement, where he also, Swift statement about Pope was as barbarous as a judge who should take up a resolution to hang all men that came before him upon trial. And then Dennis appeared where? Then later after this statement in the Dunciad. Very important. Let's talk about the question on Alexander Pope. Again, following statement hold true about Pope's essay on criticism. It is an inquiry into the nature of value of poetry. Is it? We don't know yet. It presents a series of generalized about good taste. Definitely, he talked about it. True. Remember. And it explores the challenges of impartial and just criticism. Remember, man is right and just, all these things. So that is definitely true. And it underlines the traits of the good critic. So of course, the rule book is kind of there for the good critic, and it critically reflects on Plato's rejection of poetry. He didn't talk about Plato's. Who else talked about uh, Plato? Is Aristotle, right? And who talked about it? Philip Sidney. Remember that? Like the poets are the least liar, who said Philip Sidney, and about Plato's, that the poetry is the mother of lies and it should be banned from the idealist stage. And poetry, what makes man weak, and weak with emotions and all. And poets have no knowledge about the world, all this stuff, and all the reply we got were in Philip Sidney's An Apology for Poetry. Very important, right? Anyway, we have already talked about it. You can go back and watch. Anyway, another question in essay on criticism. Pope. What Pope is doing here is the analyzing the cause of faulty criticism. Definitely, he's kind of talked about it. Right. Praises the great critic of the past. He's doing that. Remember, he talked about Aristotle and other also. Analyze the cause of faulty criticism and characterize the good critic. So he definitely talked about good critic, right? The rule book of good critic. Analyze the structure of good essay. No, he doesn't talk about essay, and analyze the structure of good essay and suggest how such an essay could be converted into good. Definitely not. Analyze the merits of poetry of Wordsworth. How Wordsworth, because Wordsworth was later in romantic. No, he was not even born when Pope was there, right? So that you can omit and understand easily. You can easily, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Remember, Perry in spring they have asked question from the word itself before, and here for you it's the whole couplet here, and the couplet is heroic, as you know. Who who wrote it? Alexander Pope, in Essay on Criticism. Easy to answer, right? An essay on criticism, all these things are there. We already discussed while we were discussing Alexander Pope. Now move on to another question. Chronologically arrange the following works on literary criticism. Easy to answer. The Art of Rhetoric, Apology for Poetry, right? And the preface, An Essay on Criticism, The Metaphysical Poet. So can you name the correct order? Right, so this is Eliot, right, and this is Essay on Criticism, is there, Pope, this is Wordsworth, this is Sydney. So definitely Sydney is there in our list, and the first one is The Art of Rhetoric. It was we already talked about Wilson in our previous session, and remember the art of rhetoric, as you know, is by Thomas Wilson. And who else wrote about the rhetoric? Can you just write in the chat box, starting from the Greco uh, especially European classical criticism, and it goes till where, to the modern also. So can you tell me who else wrote on rhetoric? So anyway, let me tell you the code. So first is The Art of Rhetoric. Remember the date is here is the date 51, and as you know, uh, our poesy is written after the death, published after the death of Philip Sidney, which was in 1519, right? 1592. So very important that you should know. Here is the Philip Sidney, Apology for Poetry, written in that time but published much later after his death. Very important. And then Essay on Criticism, of course, Pope. And then we have The Metaphysical Poet, preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800, second publication, not the first one, which was in 1798. Preface was not there, and it was added in 1800 edition. Very important that you should know. In Metaphysical Poet, as you know, T.S. Eliot, and he talked about a lot of stuff there that we're going to talk about when we'll talk about modern criticism. And next is Joseph Addition. We already talked about Tatler, right? We talked about Tatler, Spectator, Guardian, all these stuff. So what else you can just know? You can just go back and watch the previous session. You'll get about the everything about what Joseph Addition. Very important, right? Okay. Just coming back again on the pleasure of imagination. Very important. You get question on that also. On the pleasure of imagination, it was published in Spectator. We have a depth, kind of session on the Spectator and all the characters who all are there. So here we're going to talk about on the pleasure of imagination. He talked about imagination to improve society, and addition believe imagination helps to avoid slothful and illicit wage. And what else he said? He talked about the sphere on his innocent pleasure. Very important, virtue may be forfeited without expanding innocent pleasure. Great containment, refined imagination. And who else talked about imagination? Can you write in the chat box quickly? Remember, Sydney said about three type of poetry, right? Philosophy and what was it? Imaginative. Very important, right? So these things you should know. Who else wrote on imagination? Can you write in the chat box quickly if you know? Otherwise we will solve when we get the question as well, right? So that is all about our and some of the question they have asked mostly about the chronological order. Bacon should be the first, then should be the addition, then should be the lamb, then Arnold, and at the end Virginia Woolf. Easy to answer, not much of confusion. Very easy question, right? What is the chronological order of the following text? Advancement of learning, Bacon, Apology for Poetry, Sydney, which will come first, then B will come first, then will come A, right? Then the use of a spectator will come, then my relation will come, right? And at the end, how it strikes me uh, is by E will come. Easy, right? Easy to answer, not much of a. Okay, let's talk about other stuff. Joseph Edition was associated with which of the following? Of course, he was associated with Spectator and the Tatler. Not much of confusion. This is by Samuel Johnson, right? Remember that, Johnson. Okay, let's move on forward and talk about the next question here. Who among the following are the titles of the periodical? So, who are the? Of course, Dickens has the title, right? The household word, very important. And what else is there? B. Richard Steele Guardian is there, and then what we have, Franz Kafka, the Metamorphosis is a work, right? A novel, not a so that you can remove. Lee Hunt's indicator is there, so easy to answer. Right, now let's talk about other stuff. Jonathan Swift, as you can see over your screen, we have already talked about Swift and the Battle of Books itself in our previous session. Here we're gonna go just like what happened there. And as you know, he has written A Tale of a Tub and An Argument Against Abolishing Christianity, Gulliver's Travel, and Modest Proposal. And we have a very good code on Swift that I would want you to go and watch that video. Very important session it was. And the Battle of the Books, as you know, 1705, and it was with A Tale of a Tub. Very important. And what else is important? That the battle, literal battle, happened in King's Library. They have asked question, and it was the fight of the struggle for supremacy. Who is superior? Is it modern or the classical? Very important that you should know. Ancient and modern. So who are kind of in top? And that actually talked who? William Temple in his work of the ancient and the modern, and that what got so much criticism. So Swift wrote the Battle of the Books to support his kind of mentor, who is Temple. Very important. And again, it was all about the work is also the parody of heroic poetry. Remember Samuel Butler's Hudibras. And what else you can remember? The ancient, what ancient said, that all the knowledge can be found in Virgil, Cicero, Homer, and Aristotle, right? And this is a contest, as I told you about this before. And what else you can remember? You get, he said that modern man are a kind of dwarf sitting on the soldiers, soldiers of giant. Very important. They ask. They also include the allegory of a spider and bee, and the spider is described as swollen from killing numerous flies. So as you can understand, these kind of allegory are there. So the spider lives on a top shelf, okay, in a castle like web. Curious bee comes and destroy this spider's web in passing, and the spider curses the bee for running his superior creation, and the spider sees his web as a stately manner. Very important. And the bee views himself as free to roam and live in nature. And let's move on to the question. Easy to answer, right? We have Montaigne on the Cannabis, easy to answer. Jonathan Swift, Modest Proposal. Charles Lamb, This on the Artificial Comedy of the Last Century. And George Orwell, this easy to answer. Right. Again, another question about the chronological order. So, modern English users proposal for perfecting English and language. This is why did we put this question? Is there Swift work? So, proposal for perfecting the English language is by Swift. Okay, Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, as you know, British statements and talked about him when we were discussing, in our previous session about who a romantic revival. So that thing, we just today, I think we took the session in the afternoon. You can go and watch about Edmund Burke also, but here we're gonna focus on his critical work. As you can see, his book is in vindication of nature society and his reflection on the revolution of France. And this is the important work about the beautiful mind. Remember the full title, A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas. Remember, ideas of the sublime and the beautiful mind. Remember the date, because always they ask question on the chronological order, right? It is a treatise on aesthetic. Very important. They have asked question on that, and what kind of question I'll tell you after, just in 1 minute. Anyway, let's move on. It separates what the beautiful and the sublime into their respective rational category, and it attracted the attention of the great people thinkers at that time like Denis Diderot and Immanuel Kant. And Burke defines beautiful as well from aesthetically. So if you remember on aesthetic, so that is kind of solve your problem. And in the new classical period, the beautiful was favored over the sublime. So remember, beautiful is over what? Sublime. Okay, other thing you can just can pay attention here, divided into four category: formal, material, efficient and final. And beauty is unique, that traditional refined beauty cannot explain its proportion, fitness and perfection. Remember, these things I have put because they have asked question on that, right? So again, let's move on to the question on Edmund Burke's inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful, published. Remember, very important is the publication date. As you know, 57. Very important date for you. Okay, only one question. Okay, another question was there on Edmund Burke arranged a chronological order. As you can see, Samuel Johnson should be the first, right? And then comes to Edmund Burke. Then we have Boswell, Gibbon, and Sheridan at the end. Right. Which of the following books were published in the year of 1791? Very important one, because as you know, The Life of Samuel Johnson by Boswell, very important date we talked about when we were Boswell. Remember that, very important, right? By Boswell, 1791. What else was there? The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, 1791. Right. Thoughts on the Cause of the Persistent Discount, originally published in 70. And The Wealth and the Nation, Adam Smith, very important date, 1776. Dictionary, everybody knows, 1755. Now let's talk about David Hume, another thinker, and he was from the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, and he talked about empiricism, skepticism, and naturalism. Right, empiricism, our Bacon, remember that, and it this a treatise of human nature. Hume explored psychology first time, right? And human knowledge is solely derived from experience. Who else talked about experience? Filled through experience. Remember, we Locke, right? About human understanding, and about what? Tabula rasa, right? Blank slate, and filled with what? Experience. So remember all this. Anyway, a treatise of human nature. Remember the date, 39 to 40, and formulate a comprehensive philosophical system divided into three books. Very important. First is about the understanding, where he talked about the ideas, space and time, and knowledge and probability. Book 2 talked about the passion, and book 3 talked about the feelings and emotions, right? An inquiry concerning human understanding. Hume's Treatise of Human was a revised book, and he was disappointed by its reception, felt dead, born, okay, leave it. What else you can remember? Influenced Emmanuel Kant's dogmatic slumber. Remember the date, 1748. And very important is all these approaches, like different species of philosophy, ideas in space all the time, right? Association of ideas, and then operation and understanding, especially about the skeptical doubt, then skeptical solution in two parts, probabilities, ideas with connection, and liberty and necessity, and reason animal of miracle in two parts. Anyway, what question they ask about the date only? They ask about the date and chronological order, right? And he does not only talk about that stuff, but here he actually talks about a standard of taste, tasteful object, right? A reliable critic of taste is objective and sensible. Of tragedy explores what names enjoy tragic drama. Remember how a spectator enjoy from sorrow and anxiety. Pleasure comes from realizing the tragedy is fiction, right? Again, English aesthetic. Okay, now the question, what kind of question they have asked? 6 to 7 years is only the work. What? The essay of moral and political, the second sex, the pleasure of ignorance, all these stuff they have already talked about it. Everybody knows the second sex is by Simon de Beauvoir, as you can see here, and English comic writer is by William Hazlitt, and the essay on moral and political that we just talked about, David Hume, and the pleasure of ignorance is by what? B is one, of course. Who is left? The ignorance. There are two. Let me see the answer. Okay, lecture on the comic, of course, by Hazlitt, David Hume. Political, easy, second sex, Simon de Beauvoir, and Robert Wilson has written The Pleasure of Ignorance. Easy, right? So anyway, question number 22. Till now we have discussed 22 questions. Can you believe so many questions from the neoclassical criticism? So as you can see, we have all Godwin. Very important that he talked about the political justice. We talked about it. And as you know, decline of Roman Empire, our Gibbon, and the complete history of England, David Hume, the treatise of human nature. Right. Samuel Johnson. We have a separate session and watch. We're not gonna talk about him here because we have already have, as I told you, separate session. You are going to get from that session 5 question alone. You can and watch, and if you write a comment, I'll share the link also, then you can watch. But anyway, I'll just move forward. We have all the code, remember, first work, second work, last work, middle period, all these codes are there that you can go. Remember the date of dictionary 55, that's what they ask in the question. And in Samuel Johnson preface to Shakespeare. That's a big stuff because they have asked like a bunch of questions, more than 10 questions in from the past 5 to 6 years. So from the preface alone, and what he talks about Shakespeare's greatness, portrayal of human nature, faults of weakness of Shakespeare. Remember what we do when we talk about any great work or critical work, we just break it down into several parts, and here we did again 4 times. Describe first greatness, then the fault, then the relationship of plays, and then we talked about Shakespearean criticism. All we have, remember, 72 pages, not in too much. You can go and even read all of this. Remember what kind of question you got in your exam. Antiquity, like every other quality that attacks the notion of mankind, they have recently asked that question. Antiquity, like every other quality, what mankind have long possessed, they have often examined and compared, and if they persist the value of possession, it is because frequent comparison have confirmed opinion and a sphere. That the question they have asked. Remember, Shakespeare as poet of nature, his plays are neither tragedy or comedy, or you can say tragi-comedy, right? Poetry should, what he said, instruct and delight, right? And Shakespeare is a genius in comedy, very important. And people naturally like justice. Johnson was critical of Shakespeare poetic justice, and Shakespeare's drama plots are loosely formed. Always you get question from that. And Shakespeare is guilty of violating the all kind of unity like time and place. For example, Hector in Troilus, he has mentioned it. They have asked this question before, so it's very important. And what he said, Shakespeare as Homer. Remember what who else has said about Shakespeare as Homer and Ben Jonson as Virgil? Just we talked about right in the chat box quickly. Anyway, let's talk about other stuff. He talked about Shakespeare's the violation of all unity. He talked about harmony and in of the blank verse. Important paragraphs. We always get question from the paragraphs. Remember that praises are without region, lavished on the dead, and that honor due only to explain, excellence are paid off to antiquity. What else question you got? What mankind have long possessed, they have often examined. Always you get question. And this is also important. Then they ask question on that, but you should know the Pythagorean scale of number was at once discovered to be perfect. Another quote, and this is what they have asked: has been longest known, has been most considered, and what is most considered is best understood, right? And on Shakespeare, he talked about nothing can please many and please long, but just representation of nature. This is very important, right? In particular, manner can be known to few, therefore few only can judge how nearly they are copied. Very important, right? And Shakespeare is above all very important. You got question from that, the poet of nature. The whole paragraph is important. Okay. What else you can remember? It was observed of ancient school of declaration that the more diligently they were, frequently the more was the student disqualified for the world, because he found nothing there which he should ever meet in the place. I guess there was no question on it, but it's important stuff that you should know. Anyway, what else is there? I will not say with the Pope. Very important. He mentioned there, and he pleased with Pope, but he kind of, you know, talked about him. And what he said, every speech may be assigned to the proper speaker, because many speeches there are which have nothing characteristical, but perhaps those some may be equally adapted to every person, and it will be difficult to find any that can properly transferred from the present possessors of another Clement. And what else he talked about it? Shakespeare. Remember, Shakespeare has no heroes. That question you always get. And his scenes are occupied by only men, and who act speak as the reader thinks that he should himself have spoken or acted on the same occasion. Even where the agency is supernatural, the dialogue is level with life. And this, therefore, is the praise of Shakespeare. And remember, the mirror of life. Recent question I'm talking about, this one was there. And the poet of whose works have undertaken the revision may now begin to assume the dignity of an ancient and claimed the privilege of established fame and perspective veneration. He has long outlived his century. The term commonly fixed as the rest of the literature merit. Remember, all these quotes are important. These are actually actual phrase from the essay itself that I have taken from the whole text and found all these, right? And lives of the most eminent English poet, what you have to know, especially the date of, very important, always chronological order every single time, I'm telling you, right? So 52 poets, remember. And what we always do when we talk about any great critical work, we kind of divide, right, in different section, or kind of break it down. So remember, a narrative of the poet's life, a presentation of his character and critical assessment of the main work, very important. And it is not arranged by the date of birth, remember, it is arranged by the date of death. That's very important, because you get question from ABCD option always about life, and also about particular critic as well. Anyway, uh, notable lives are, you can see, Abraham Cowley, John Milton, John Dryden, Joseph Addison, Alexander Pope, William Collins, and William Stepstein. But anyway, we have a session, as I'm just going through quickly because 1 hour Samuel Johnson, that you can always go back and watch, right? And if you can't find the video, you can just write Samuel Johnson in the chat box. I'll quickly share the link, then you can go and watch. So John Milton, Thomas Gray, because he didn't like them. What he said about the Milton's black verse is the lapidary style. They have asked question on that already. Right. And what else he talked about? That he puts his words out of common order, seeming to think with some later candidate for fame that to write prose is certainly to write poetry. Right. He was kind of very proud of life of Cowley. There he talked about what metaphysical poets, right? That word. And he talked about discordia conquer for this praise. And this was a recent question on, very recent question on Cowley life of, or the lives, right? And remember, the Pope life is the longest and the best. He actually liked Pope a lot. It was the longest and the best. It was Milton that he didn't like, right? And what else he said about the Pope lives and career were fresh. It was public in ample biography. Johnson fond of Pope's what poetry highly and what he talked about it. Johnson agreed to write little lives and preface. It was in the beginning, before when he started it, and he defended Pope as poet when there was a lot of criticism on Pope. He said what? It is surely superfluous to answer the question that has once been asked, whether Pope was a poet. Then by asking in return, remember this quote, always you get, if Pope be not a poet, where is poetry to be found? Right, that's very important. And what else he did? He considered Dryden great Pope. So he also Dryden, right? And he separated a poet's life from what their work. Believed a good poet wasn't necessarily a good man. Acknowledged contradiction between life and writing, and sought to promote pity through biographical paths. Right, chastise failing, command virtue. And what he said, from Dryden to Pope, he favored poets from Dryden to Pope. Skeptical about the Gray and Collins, and admires Gray an elegy written in a country churchyard, and used his method to assign different purposes to life and the poetry analysis. Anyway, some other quote that you always get question, little lives and little preface, you get question. He puts his words out of the common order. Remember to think with some later candidates. About William Collins, they have asked, it is surely superfluous to answer the question. Remember, the Pope was a poet, and otherwise Where is poetry? Pope, be not a poet. Where is poetry to be found? Right? A manifest and striking contrary between the life of author and his writing in such a manner as may tend to the uh, promotion of pity. Let's talk about Edward Young. Why is famous? Because of the Knight's Thought. They have asked question on that about the blank written in blank verse. But we have mentioned him here because of the conjecture on the original composition to Samuel Richardson. Who else? Sir Joshua Reynolds, only famous for the uh, club. Remember the club or Samuel Johnson Club? It was founded by Joshua Reynolds, and he was an English painter. And he talked about the grand style in painting. And he was the founder of the Royal Academy Art. So these four things are important about Sir Joshua Reynolds, and he was always mentioned with who? Samuel Johnson, because of the literary club. Right. So anyway, let me tell you about. He also wrote the discourse on art. Immanuel Kant. Anyway, we'll talk about him when we talk about, especially in Romantic Revival. We have already today we had a session on, right? So critique of pure reason, very important work, and the critique of practical reason and groundwork of the metaphysical moral. So all these works are important for you to remember. Here we are only going to talk about the critique of judgment because it is his third critique, and especially on judgment follows what after it was published, pure reason. Yeah, after that, and of course critical reason is also there, divided in two sections, the critique of aesthetic and theological. We only focusing on here, right? And judgment of taste, moment of quality, moment of quantity, and moment of relation, and modality. And the book discusses aesthetic judgment, beautiful and the boy. So the first guy who talked about the beautiful and the aestheticism is our who? None other than our Immanuel Kant. Very important, right? Some of the questions on Samuel Johnson, we have already had a session on question also in when we were talking about Samuel Johnson. So guys, that's all today. And remember, if you want to access the notes, you can always WhatsApp me, or you just, you know, what you can do, notes in the, just know that you need notes, and I'll get back to you, as soon as I see the message or the chat or the comment. So don't forget to like and subscribe the channel, very important. And remember, the session that I took now, you are going to get 5 questions, and it is 100% sure, right? Because as you know, total how many questions are there? 30 plus 20, 50 question we have in the new classical period, and it is only from the criticism, new classical criticism. That's a huge number of question. If you consider 4 to 5 years, then this particular session is very important. And remember, don't forget to solve Samuel Johnson, that we have already, all these PYQ we have already discussed when we were talking about Samuel Johnson in our previous session. Write Johnson in the chat box. I'll quickly get back to you and share the link as well. Anyway, thanks all, and all these things we have already a lot of things actually we have learned tonight, right? And you can just get back to me, and I'll provide the notes if you want. Remember what? Like and subscribe, and if possible, you can easily what? Leave a comment, and I'll get back to you. Bye bye, and good night, and take care.